and welcome friends. My name is Lynn, and today in this video what I thought I would do is share with you a pop-up card version of the Squash Book mini album that I am teaching at the Not Too Shabby Enjoy This Life free virtual retreat. If you're catching this after the retreat, that my session and all of the other workshop sessions are available on replay, so if you want to catch that, you still can. I'm starting off with some solid color cardstock cut to 8 inches by 8 inches. I already scored at 4 inches along one of those 8-inch edges, and then I rotated 90 degrees and I'm going to score a second line, again in half at 4 inches. So you can actually adapt this to whatever size card you'd like to make. Today I'm making a 6x6 card, and I know that this size will fit inside my 6x6 card. After I've put those two score lines in, I am going to fold and burnish really well. Burnishing is just, running something like a bone folder along that folded line so that you get a really nice crisp edge. It also helps to actually fold this down really flatly. And so for this, it's going to be really important because this is going to collapse in on itself and transform from an 8x8 square to a 4x4 square. So here's how that looks. Now we need to actually put in a third score line. And what I like to do is I am just going to use my cutting track on my all-in-one tool here because it's easier for me to line up and make sure that the two diagonal points on my square are in the same track. So all I'm doing is just connecting from one corner to the corner on the opposite side. And this score line, I actually want to put on the reverse side that I scored the first two score lines. I always fold my score lines as mountain folds. And what you'll end up with is the first two score lines should be a mountain fold, and this diagonal line should actually be a valley fold. So to get a valley fold, I just score from the opposite side as my mountain folds, and then I fold. And again, we want to burnish that line nice and firmly so that you get a really nice crisp fold. And the result of this is that once you kind of pinch the corners in here, this is going to naturally collapse down to a 4x4 square. It's really cool. So we've taken this really large 8x8 piece of solid color cardstock, and we've essentially reduced it down to a 4-inch square that can now fit inside a 6x6 card. So you can adapt this technique to any size card that you'd like to make. You might just have to experiment with a little bit with how large of a piece of cardstock to start with, because essentially the widest part of this is going to be the diagonal of that 4x4 inch square. So you can always pull out your math and your geometry and figure out what's the largest square that you can fit inside whatever card base you happen to have and want to use, or you can just do a little bit of trial and error with some copy paper. and that way you can just experiment a little with some inexpensive copy paper. And then when you have the size that you want, then you can actually keep that copy paper as a bit of a template. So now that our pop-up mechanism is essentially complete, here comes the fun part of just decorating. So this fun fold is great because, as you saw, we took an 8x8 and we kind of folded it all down to a 4x4. But when it opens back up, there's so much room to decorate because look at all of that space now. So I really love cards like these because it makes really good use of your gorgeous pattern papers. So many opportunities to decorate and add your mats and layers. And what I like to do when I'm picking my pattern papers, especially if, like on a card like this, where I do want to showcase a lot of different designs, but I don't want your eyes to be too overwhelmed with pattern. And so what I was thinking as I was selecting my papers for this card was I want the two pattern papers to be like different enough so that they don't just blend into one another. And so that's why I picked this floral print, which has a very dark background. And then the other floral that I picked has a very light background. But they still, coordinate because they're all part of the same paper pad. This one comes included with the kit, and the plaids that coordinate are an additional add-on, or that it might have been free if you ordered during the early bird special. Now, for the triangle pieces, what I've done is cut a square that's 3 3/4 by 3 3/4, and I lined up the diagonals, the points of my square inside my trimmer here. And I just cut that 3 3/4 inch square in half to make 2 triangles. Now, if you're doing it my way, then how you want to adhere those triangles is you actually want to keep them that long, the bisected edge. You want to keep that close to the fold line because then it will match the border all the way around your pop-up mechanism. It'll line up with the square pieces. However, if you prefer the look of having a little bit of your green cardstock still showing through at that diagonal edge, then what I would recommend is just along the diagonal edge, just trim a little sliver off, maybe a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch, whatever looks nice to your eyes. And so this way, if you did that, then you would have a nice green border all the way around each of your triangles as well. Which, I think that might have been a good idea in hindsight for me to do, because what I ended up doing was I alternated my triangles so that you have a little bit of like a mix match. And that way the card kind of accentuates the triangles a little bit. Okay, so now to glue this into our card. I am going to start off with, I definitely recommend liquid adhesive because, we're going to attach a lot of things to this and you really want to make sure this is well secured into your card. And the liquid adhesive is going to be really strong and very permanent. Now what I want to do is try to center this as best as possible, and what I'm really aiming for is that folded tip of this square to be right up against, close to the fold of my card base. This will be a top folding 6x6 card, but I don't want to cross over. So you can see I've actually lined this up with my pattern paper because the same rule applies to the pattern paper. That's why you can see a little bit of that white of my card base. That's the fold. So steer clear from your fold. You want to go right up against it, but you don't want to cross over because then it's going to make it very hard for this card to fold flat again. And this is why I mentioned burnishing really well, because burnishing really helps all of your folds to fold more flat. And we end up with a lot of layers here because, again, we took an 8x8 and we've basically folded it down to a 4x4. Now, to get this other half to attach, we just want to put glue on the exposed cardstock that you see here, just along that square. And it's as easy as just closing the front or the top of your card down. And make sure it folds nice and flat. That way it ensures that your card will fold flat if this is a card that you need to put through the mail. And if you are using a liquid adhesive, give it a moment. Give it a moment to really dry, but definitely burnish really well. It just helps to spread that glue out, make sure that everything's flat, there are no bubbles, that all the adhesive makes really firm contact. If you are using a quick grab glue, then hopefully you don't have to wait too long before you can start to open and play with the mechanism. But now that that's done, I do want to give it some time to dry. And so what I'm going to do is focus on the outside of my card for a moment. Now, when I cut down my pattern papers, as you may recall, I cut them to 3¼ by 3¼ And that really means that you can only get one of those squares from each sheet of 6x6 pattern paper. I know that's not the most efficient cut. So what I want to do is show you how you can use those offcuts so that you don't have a lot of these strips left over. They're big enough, they're wide enough that I feel like you could probably use them pretty easily. They're not super small strips. But let's try to use up everything and not have to cut into fresh sheets of pattern paper. And I am going to start off, basically what I'm going to do is kind of my favorite technique for using up your scraps. And that is a bit of paper quilting, or you could consider it maybe tiling, because bricklaying is kind of similar to this. There's lots of different patterns that you can use. All I'm trying to do here is I've cut out a square that I want to kind of try to position so that it's centered. And I very rarely, go for something like super duper centered, but this time I did want to make the effort to have this be as centered as possible. So that's why I'm giving myself little tick marks. I'm giving myself little lines to really try to help me position this first piece. Once I get this first piece in, it's going to kind of dictate the rest of my pattern. So that's why I'm taking the time to really get this first part right. Because if this is nice and square, and everything is straight and lined up and positioned exactly where it needs to go, everything else is going to go so much more smoothly. So I'm going to get that square glued down. You don't really have to worry too much about the pencil marks because we're going to cover everything up. I am just going to cut some strips that are, I think they ended up being 1 1/8 wide. And I'm just going to start to glue these down in a bit of a pinwheel pattern. So as I lay one strip down, I am going to butt up the next strip right against that first piece of pattern paper and right along my square. And then that creates this initial pinwheel. And I can just continue to lay down pattern paper and just let it kind of hang right off the edge. And as I go, I can just trim off whatever overhangs and continue to use those smaller pieces in other areas. Now, what I want to try to do as I'm choosing which papers to go where is I want to use the same papers that I'm using on the inside of the card, because then it'll bring a little bit of the outside of the card to the inside once the card recipient opens it up. I'm also looking to kind of balance out, something that has a lot of florals with maybe something a little bit more solid or something a little bit more like a plaid. That way we have some variation and we have some distinction, because all of these pattern papers they're butting up right against one another. So if you pick two patterns that are a little too similar, be it in color or in pattern, then it's a little bit harder to recognize this sort of quilted effect. But if you pick pattern papers that have some contrast, so contrast in any way, whether it's a floral versus a geometric, whether it's got a light background versus a dark background, and the colors, if it's a, darker color, lighter color, complementary colors, etc. Any kind of contrast helps to really recognize this quilted pattern. And you can see I'm going to actually cover up that initial starting square. Doesn't really matter if you wanted that visible, you could definitely keep that visible, but I was just using it as a starting position essentially to get my pattern started. And then I'm going to just embellish it with, there's some really fabulous stamp sentiments that you can use. I'm going to keep it simple for the outside of the card because I like for all of the fun to be on the inside. And by now, my mechanism has had plenty of time to dry. So I will start to decorate the inside. Now, with the inside, one of the things that you can do is you can, on these side flaps here with the fold, you can actually attach things that go above the fold. Just make sure you don't glue it down to the other half. So you can adhere things that are larger than just the triangle. Just make sure that you are only gluing it down to one section of the triangle, not to both. That allows the triangle to still fold down. So I'm going to keep, again, this is going to be sort of simple on the inside because I think the papers I want to keep to be the star of this card, but I did want to have a nice place so that you can actually write a message. So I did add a solid color cardstock to that bottom square. That way I have a place to write a message and sign the card. So here's how this pops up, and look at all of that space that we have. I really wanted the pattern papers to shine, so I don't want to add too much ephemera to cover things up too much. But I love having the girls here and having them stand up when you open up this card. So how fun is that? And it's such an easy mechanism. I'm sure you can come up with loads of ways to use this. It's perfect for big occasions, big birthdays even. I hope that you enjoyed this variation on my squash book mini album, just to give you more ideas for how you can use those very same tips and tricks and techniques and bring them into your card making. Thanks for checking out my video today, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye!